Right now, we're engaged in a full-out battle with regards to the American Library Association. The ALA hired a self-described Marxist lesbian who is trying to usher in, and I'm quoting here, the queering of America's youth through the library system.
Keeping our republic is on the line, and it requires patriots with great passion, dedication, and eternal vigilance to preserve our freedoms. Jenny Beth Martin is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She is an author, a filmmaker, and one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world. But the title she is most proud of is mom to her boy-girl twins. She has been at the forefront, fighting to protect America's core principles for more than a decade. Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
Arizona State Senator Jake Hoffman is my next guest, and he is a rock star. He was encouraged to run for school board by his wife in 2012, and after some major issues and 2.5 weeks of counting ballots, he was finally declared the winner by less than 100 votes. That district was in Maricopa County, by the way. While serving on the school board, his push for transparency led to actual accountability for a corrupt district superintendent. Then, during the COVID lockdowns in 2020, Jake was serving on a town council where he sounded the alarm against COVID tyranny. When town staffers decided to fill a local skate park with sand to keep people from using it, Jake fought back until the town manager reversed the decision. He received great praise for standing up for people's rights. He went on to serve in the Arizona State House and is now serving as a state senator where he founded the Arizona Freedom Caucus. Jake is a true freedom fighter. Jake, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course.
You are elected in the Arizona legislature, and you started the equivalent of the House Freedom Caucus here, right? Tell me about that.
That's right. So about 2.5 years ago, a number of legislators from across the country were sitting down in Washington, D.C. in the Trump Hotel, and we had a conversation that, we all know Washington, D.C. is epically broken. It hasn't balanced its budget since, the early 2000s, late 90s.
Right.
It's not going to be the answer to our nation's problems. And, if we look at the federalist form of government that our founders created, the states are really those petri dishes for freedom and for exploration and for sound policy. And so what we did is we said the House Freedom Caucus is holding down the fight, holding down the battle when it comes to Washington, D.C. We need to export that to the states. What most people don't realize is that there is the same level of systemic brokenness that exists in D.C. exists in all 50 state capitals. The lobbyists run the joint, the establishment and the uniparty run amok, and so we have to have conservative fighters who band together and are willing to stand in the gap and fight those interests that really are at conflict with the interests of the people of those states and of the American people at large.
So you've got the Freedom Caucus in Arizona, and how many other state Freedom Caucuses are there?
Well, the State Freedom Caucus Network, which is run by Andy Roth, so former Club for Growth, and then Justin Wilmette, who was the executive director of the House Freedom Caucus for a number of years. The State Freedom Caucus Network now consists of 11 Freedom Caucuses. So that's states like Louisiana, we've got Wyoming, we've got Montana, we've got Idaho, obviously Arizona, South Carolina, and a number of other states as well. And, these state freedom caucuses are leading the fight. Right now, we're engaged in a full-out battle with regards to the American Library Association. The ALA hired a self-described Marxist lesbian who is trying to usher in, and I'm quoting here, the queering of America's youth through the library system. They're right now actively coaching librarians all across the country how to secretly and subversively deny Kirk Cameron, who's trying to do, common sense story hours, real kind of good American traditional, story hours, not these sexualized drag queen stuff. But they're actually trying to orchestrate denying them access to libraries that are taxpayer funded. And so the Arizona Freedom Caucus and all of the other state freedom caucuses are leading the fight on that. And we've seen that time and time again. Just a few months ago, we actually saw an incredible kind of groundswell, if you will, against a provision in what's called the Uniform Commercial Code. Now, this is so boring for most of your listeners, but it's so incredibly important because buried in a 113-page bill that was exported to all 50 states was one provision that was less than a full sentence long. So out of 113 pages, it was about 9 words. And what it would have done is preemptively ban cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and also preemptively authorize Joe Biden's central bank digital currency. Now, they tried to slip this in and pull it over everybody's eyes, but thankfully, a member of the South Dakota Freedom Caucus actually was, Red Bulling and reading all of the words of the bill, identified it, and within 24 hours, states like Arizona, because of our Freedom Caucus, had actually gone in and shut that bill down and gotten it killed completely.
That is amazing. What other kind of wins have you had?
Well, in Arizona, the Arizona Freedom Caucus is actually having tremendous wins. The liberal media is losing their minds because we are actually controlling the agenda within the state of Arizona. They routinely, they think they're chastising us, but in reality, we actually take it like an incredible compliment. But they say that, the legislature is dancing to our tune. And what they mean by that is, I'll give you one example. So I chair the Director Nominations Committee. Now, the Arizona Senate, just like the U.S. Senate, we have an incredibly important responsibility, which is confirming Katie Hobbs's nominees. So the Senate has the responsibility to advise and consent on, nominees to lead agencies like the Department of Health Services, Department of Public Safety, Department of Child Services, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you wouldn't think that the Department of Health Services, or at least a few years ago,
right,
you wouldn't have thought that that would be an important post. But post-COVID, we now know, we're all awake to the fact that there is a tyranny laying deep within the belly of government that none of us expected even a few years ago. And so Katie Hobbs, she nominated a woman named Dr. Teresa Cullen, who was the Pima County Health Director. Pima County is Tucson, Arizona, right? One of the most liberal areas in the country. She nominated this woman to be the head of the Arizona Department of Health Services. So we brought her in for a confirmation hearing. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't a pretty scene for Katie Hobbs because it was one lie after another after another. We caught her multiple times just outright lying to the committee, trying to hide the disastrous policies that she had put in place. Things like forced vaccinations, forced lockdowns, shaming business. They actually created a website to shame Pima County businesses that weren't compliant enough with the government's mandates. And we were able to shut that down. Another big win that we had is we got all the conservatives to come together, and we did something radical, Jenny Beth. We gave taxpayers back their money in the budget process.
That is radical.
Imagine that, right?
Yeah.
It's their money. And we actually gave Arizona families a $270 million tax rebate. Those checks are going to be hitting, and they can be upwards of $750. And they're going to hit families' bank accounts come November, right as we head into the holidays when finances get tight. And, it's not just the holidays. In Joe Biden's economy, real wage growth is down. Interest rates are skyrocketing. I saw a stat just yesterday that it was the average price of a home because of interest rates is up over $1,300 a month right now, right? And then you take in fact, you factor in inflation, they're paying more at the gas pump, more at the grocery store, milk, eggs, everything is through the roof expensive. So we're going to make sure that Arizona families get as much of their money back as humanly possible.
That is really good. It shouldn't be radical at all to do that. What are the challenges that are facing you here in Arizona?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we have, we're in a new position as a state. We have a Democrat-controlled executive branch. Now, this is something that Arizonans haven't had to deal with in a number of years. Since Janet Napolitano, all the way back in the late 20-aughts, we haven't had to deal with this. And so what we're seeing is that Katie Hobbs unfortunately, is essentially playing a game of hold my beer with states like California and New York and Illinois. She's trying to go as extreme and as radical as she possibly can to, I guess, prove her chops as a partisan ideologue. And, the sad thing is we saw it start really kind of aggressively with Barack Obama. We've seen it aggressively with Joe Biden, with Gavin Newsom and other leftist governors. But we're seeing Katie Hobbs play out of the same book when it comes to executive authority and overreaching when it comes to the use of executive orders. And so she started, day one in office, she drops a radical LGBTQ executive order, and she hasn't stopped. I mean, as recently as just, maybe a month ago, she dropped new EOs that stripped duly elected county attorneys of their authority to prosecute abortion-related crimes. Now, that would be like Donald Trump. Let's just use him as the example since they love to politicize him. That would be like Donald Trump going in and saying, well, I don't like X, Y, or Z. I don't like the fact that you aren't allowing more drilling permits. And him just saying, well, willy-nilly, I'm going to just do away with that, right? It would be like taking any law that's already on the books and just saying, because I don't like it, we're not going to enforce it. Well, that's not how our system of government works.
At least it's not how it's supposed to work.
That's right. It's not how it's supposed to work, for sure. And so I think the biggest challenge that we see now is keeping Republicans coalesced, keeping them united in the legislature around conservative principles to fight back and push back on this radical agenda. A lot of people think that when you're in a split government, a divided government kind of model like we have here, that the best option is to moderate. The best option is to abandon your principles, run to the middle, and try and be as bipartisan as possible. But what we know from states like Florida is that when you lead boldly from a conservative point of view, our principles have lifted more people out of poverty, brought more opportunity and prosperity than anything else in the history of mankind. And Florida, look, Ron DeSantis, when he ran in 2018, he won with less than 0.5% margin, less than 35,000 votes. That was his margin of victory. But yet 4 years later, with a net gain of only about 450,000 new move-ins to the state of Florida, he won by over 1.5 million votes. That was a margin of victory of about 19.5%. And it was because he took on cultural issues. He took on the culture war issues because at the end of the day, people care about the things that impact their lives. They care about what their children are being forced to read, what they're being taught at school. They care about the money in their pockets, the opportunities that they have to move up in life and in society. Those are the things that we've got to focus on and stay united on in order to beat this radical agenda.
And how's that going with your fellow elected officials?
Well, I think it's going actually really well right now. We had one kind of misstep right at the end of session that we'll save for another conversation.
Sure.
But all in all, it was about a 99% success rate this legislative session. And look, when you factor in Arizona's not from a legislative majority standpoint, we're not a super red state, right? You've got states like South Carolina that have super majorities in both chambers. Right? I mean, they are wildly Republican, let's say not conservative, but Republican. And South Carolina can't accomplish half of what the state of Arizona accomplishes. And Arizona only has, by contrast, a 1-vote majority in each chamber. So we only have the room for error of one single vote in the House and one single vote in the Senate. And if we can't thread that needle, we can't get things done. Yet, with a 1-vote majority, we passed the largest tax cut in Arizona history 2 years ago. We passed over 35 key election integrity reforms over the past 2 years. Last year, we went to universal backpack funding, empowerment scholarship accounts for school choice. I mean, we have been doing some very cutting-edge conservative policy, and we've been doing it with the thinnest of margins. The reason why is because Arizona Republicans are united in the fact that our principles, they really do help people.
That is really inspiring. And it's good for people to hear that you're having such a good impact and that you're showing that you don't go to the middle to make a difference. You show the bold contrast between the radical left policies and the conservative policies that bring everybody up, regardless of of all the things that the left tries to use to divide us.
That's right. Well, I mean, look, if we look back at our founding and at the stories of America, it's easy sometimes to feel like George Washington's men. Bob McEwen, former congressman, he gives a great talk, and he talks about from the founding, July 4th, 1776, all the way through December, right? The day after Christmas of 1776. And George Washington and his men, they got beat over and over and over during that almost 5.5 month period. I mean, they went from 20,000 troops to 2,500 troops because they were so just ill and injured, and many of them even abandoned, right? Because they were getting beat so often. And yet the battle at Trenton, right? The surprise attack at Trenton, he goes in with a few hundred soldiers and is able to achieve this big victory because they knew what they were fighting for. And, oftentimes we tend to feel that we're surrounded, right? We've got cancel culture. We've got higher education telling us that, men can be women and women can be men. We've got racist ideology and critical race theory. I could go down the list. I mean, we all know it, though.
Right.
It's easy to feel surrounded. But what I like to remind people of is that, in the book of Psalms, we all know this great passage that it says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And we all know what the punchline is. It's for thou art with me, right? And that's an incredibly important piece of that verse, but it's not the only important piece of that verse. What the valley is called is intentional. It is, the Bible is the divine words of God, right? And it's called the valley of the shadow of death, not the valley of death. And what we know about shadows is that they're scary and they're dark and they make the evils look bigger than they really are, but they can't hurt us. And that's exactly where we're at today. The left is doing everything it can to create shadows and to create this appearance that they outnumber us. I mean, that was one of the founding kind of mantras of the Tea Party, right? Is they don't outnumber us. Right. We surround them. We have to remember that, and we have to remember that our founding fathers, for all of the distortion that time and history put on them, they weren't more qualified than us. They weren't stronger or better equipped or better educated than the people today, than the patriots in this country right now. They just had the courage to step up when time and circumstance called their name and to be a part of history. The pages of our nation's future history books are being written right now, and it's going to record a hell of a lot of people in your audience as the patriots who give us the next 250 years of freedom, just like our founders gave us the first 250 years.
And it's people like you who are making such a difference.
Thank you.
Now, we talked about your legislative efforts. You also have an activist platform, and you have you're engaged also in a tool that entrepreneurs can use to fight the cancel culture. Do you want to talk about those?
I'd love to. Thank you. Yes. So we created, me and my business partner created Align for Freedom. It's an ecosystem for an alternate economy. And look, the reality is the left has outflanked us for decades when it comes to tactics and tools, right? They took technology, leveraged it early, and built a suite of tools that have enabled activists on the left, have enabled businesses on the left, have enabled an entire ecosystem on the left to really exercise their will. Well, if we're going to be successful as conservatives and as freedom-loving Americans, we have to have tools that support our values, right? This values-based consumerism, Patriot Mobile is a perfect example. They were one of the earliest, the first. AMAC Action and AMAC are another one. They were some of the first to enter this kind of alternate economy before we really understood the nomenclature. Well, Align for Freedom is coming in to bolster that and to give businesses through AlignPay, which are cancel culture-free payment processing solutions, to give businesses and nonprofit organizations the ability to collect donations and process payments, to take card payments in person and online, at events, no matter where you're at, and do it with the comfort of knowing that you're not going to be subjected to cancel culture. I can't tell you how many businesses we've had. Some have been churches, some have been conservative nonprofit groups, but we've had countless businesses come to us because they got canceled. And we were able to get them back up and running within 24 hours, and they haven't had any issues since. Look, we are committed to allowing people to engage in every legal commerce that exists in America without fear of being canceled. Now, the other platform within the Align for Freedom ecosystem today is called AlignAct, AlignAct.com. And it is, think GoFundMe on steroids times a million, right? What we've done is enabled one-click emails, one-click phone calls into legislators and corporate leaders. Look, every American deserves to have a voice. And unfortunately, the establishment, the system, K Street, the lobbyists, whatever you want to call it, they've built their tools and then they walled them off so that the average American doesn't have access to those tools. So while they're using that for, and we'll pick Iowa corn farmers to get ethanol subsidies, right? And lobbying Congress to give out more of your money to pay for their business, right? The regular person the regular mom, let's say in rural Nebraska, that needs to advocate for common sense policy change at her local school board doesn't have any tools to do that. The parent who says, to heck with this, I'm done with Disney's woke agenda, doesn't have tools to be able to reach into Disney and tell those corporate leaders, here's what the American people actually think. And so AlignAct.com, it's free. It's designed to allow every person in America to be able to have a voice and have a megaphone right into the decision makers that are impacting their lives.
So if you are an activist in Nebraska, like a mom, what do you do when you go on the website?
So you go to AlignAct.com, you can click Get Started or Start a Campaign, and right there you'll be prompted to go through a 4-step process to create a campaign that anyone in America can go take action on. And look, it's important to note, when we say anyone in America, why would somebody in Florida want to take action on something in Nebraska, right? A school board issue in Nebraska. Well, if we're going to actually pull from the left's own playbook, go back to like 2008, 2009, North Carolina passed a bill that said you had to use the bathroom of the gender on your birth certificate. Imagine that. We've been having these bathroom battles for decades, right? So North Carolina passes this, and the left uses national pressure to affect local change. They flooded the North Carolina governor and legislature and businesses. The March Madness was supposed to be there that year. They flooded the NCAA with emails and phone calls and tweets and Facebook posts and you name it, trying to create a national groundswell to force them into complying with the left's agenda. Now, I'll tell you, we've had success, and that's why we think that Floridians or Californians or whoever they are should be able to engage on issues no matter where they are in the country. By doing that, we've actually had organizers be able to get Pepsi to commit to stopping funding of BLM. I mean, that's a huge win. The Disney executive that was fired after the Don't Say Gay controversy was because of a campaign run by one of our organizers. We've had numerous successes like that, and it's all thanks to organizers like Tea Party Patriots and other organizations, and really to the grassroots activists who get on and make their voices heard.
And it's a very simple platform to use. And then once a campaign is created, if you don't want to create your own campaign, it's easy to just go find ways to be active on it and take action on campaigns that other groups or individuals have set up.
That's right. Right on the homepage, if you go to AlignAct.com, you're going to see a featured campaign, which is a really important top-tier campaign that's going on right now and needs action. But then you're also going to see trending campaigns. And those are campaigns that a lot of people are going and engaging with. And so that's a good way to know, hey, I want to get involved. I want to make my voice heard on this groundswell issue because it's ramping up and it's going to make a big difference. And then you can go up to the top of the page, you can click Browse Campaigns, and you can see every campaign that's active on the site at any given time. It's a great tool, not only if you're going to start a campaign, but also if you want to be an activist who just wants to make their voice heard and have an impact.
Now, what about the AlignPay? What if you have a business right now and maybe you're using Stripe or PayPal or something else? What do you recommend for those businesses?
Well, you're giving me nightmares with some of those names you're throwing out.
But they're the ones that,
they are.
that businesses use, and I'm not picking on any
no, of course
business,
not.
But let's say you're looking for a conservative alternative.
Well, you go to AlignPay.com, AlignPay.com, and you click Get Started. You fill out an easy application, and from there, you'll get contacted by one of our customer support folks, and we'll get you boarded on and ready to process within just a couple hours.
And it's a lot easier to go ahead and do it now rather than getting in that crisis situation, which I've connected people with you who are in that crisis situation. Right. It's not a fun place for them to be.
The horror stories that we've heard from folks. We had an organization, wonderful conservative Missouri nonprofit. They came to us right after having gotten canceled by a payment processor owned by J.P. Morgan Chase, of all places. And they canceled them because they had the audacity to invite Donald Trump Jr. to come speak at their annual gala fundraiser.
How dare you have someone speak?
Can you imagine that you would let someone's opinions be heard? Well, so they came to us, and here was the kicker. J.P. Morgan Chase's WePay, they actually held on to all of the donations for the event. So they had already collected about $45,000 worth of ticket registrations. They held on to it. And so as they're coming to us, they're now having to fight two battles. They're having to get onboarded and start again, but then they're also having to battle with JP Morgan Chase to get their donations back to them. Another horror story that we hear is that they do automatic refunds. So when they cancel your account, Stripe actually, we've heard this about Stripe, that they will cancel your account and then automatically refund clients. And that's, that's a challenge because now you have to circle back to all those people. You have to try and get them to donate again. And look, I'm not dogging on either of these companies, okay?
No,
what I am doing, though, is presenting an alternative.
Right. So. And it has happened, and we're not saying that they do it to every single client, but you and I both have had entrepreneurs and nonprofits, but especially the ones that I should worry about nonprofits as well. They have a business and events that they're doing. When I hear about it from just an entrepreneur who had his business or a doctor and all of a sudden they can't get their payments processed, it's frustrating. And so
it disrupts the American dream. I mean, look, if you don't have the right to commerce, if you don't have the right to engage in your business, that really disrupts your entire right to pursue happiness. Right? Because, look, you can't go and make your voice heard in Washington, D.C. You can't go and assemble, right, and exercise your right of assembly. You can't exercise your right to speech when you're just worried about putting bread on the table, when you're worried about putting gas in the gas tank. And so, look, while there are plenty of great elements of some of these companies, AlignPay exists to offer an alternative. If you want the confidence and the comfort of knowing that you won't be canceled, as long as you're engaging in lawful business, go to AlignPay.com and we would absolutely love to protect you and help you.
And you've been around for a few years, so it's not a brand new company. And not that there's anything wrong with the brand new companies that are coming out. I'm glad that so many more are coming out. But I know that AlignPay has been around for
we're coming up on 2 years now.
Yeah, I was about to say 2 years, couple of years.
Yeah, that's right.
That's exciting for you.
Thanks. Yeah, it is. It's very exciting. And, it's amazing the diversity of the merchants and the organizations that have come to us. Everything from utility companies in the great state of Texas to newspapers up in Wyoming. I mean, it really is. Churches, businesses, small retailers, big retailers. I mean, it's been just across the board. We really had great success.
That's terrific. Now, I know time is really short, but I have one last question that is going to take a little bit of time for you to explain. You stepped up and you ran for office. Why did you do that? And if people are listening right now, how do they decide that that's what they should also do?
Absolutely. Well, I was a post-Tea Party step-up. I stepped up in 2012, and quite honestly, I got frustrated. I got tired of hearing politicians and pundits on TV or on the radio, and they said all these words. They said so many words, and they never meant a damn one of them. And that's a problem. We have to have people who not only have the ability to go and say the words, but have the conviction and the resolve to actually execute on them. And, I got involved. I didn't know anything about politics. I got to be honest. It's hilarious, actually. I didn't even know that the Republican Party at the time was more than just being registered as a Republican. I mean, I was as green to this as you could get. And I ran for the school board. Actually, my wife, I have to blame it on her. She said, hey, hon, why don't you run for the school board? She was a public school teacher at the time. So I went down the street. 2 miles away from my house was the headquarters for the public school system. And I went and I watched. And after 2 meetings, I came home and I remember vividly, I told my wife, everything I'm frustrated about in Washington, D.C., everything I'm frustrated about at our state government, it's happening right there. And so I ran, and I'll tell you what, God has a really funny sense of humor, because on election night I lost. And it took 2.5 weeks. This is all the way back in 2012. It took 2.5 weeks of Maricopa County counting the ballots before I won by 88 votes, right? And I mean, so that just goes to say, from an election integrity standpoint, these are not 2020 issues.
No.
These have been going on a long time. Maricopa County has always sucked at elections, okay? But so I ran for school board, and, I just went in with a servant's heart that I wanted to be the productive disruptor needed to ensure that our children got the highest quality education possible, that parents had an advocate on the school board, and that taxpayers had somebody looking out for their backs. And, I don't say this with joy, but it resulted in the superintendent of the school district was recently indicted on 27 felony counts of public corruption with 3 co-conspirators from the time that I was on the school board. Wow. I mean, it's really amazing how corrupt it was. And the threads that I was pulling on ultimately led to justice being served and people getting some semblance of closure on the issues that they were experiencing as parents and families that were sending their kids to those schools. I then served on a town council. God called me to that post to go serve on a town council. And, at the time, I got to be honest, God has a plan, and we've got to be willing to follow it, but we don't always know why. And when I got to 2020, I'm serving on a town council, and one day I get a phone call, and they say they just put sand on the skate park, and they took down all the basketball nets. And I said, okay, not in my town. And so I went back, and I fought our town management, town staff, and within 8 hours of me getting on the horn with them, and I actually threatened them. I said, if you don't go out there and clean it, I said, I will put on my pajamas and I will go out there and clean it, and I will call every news crew that I can get out here, and I will make it so embarrassing for you it's not even funny. And it took about 8 hours, and they finally got everything, all the parks reopened, all of the insanity done. We treated businesses with respect. We didn't do lockdowns. Yeah. We didn't do mask mandates. And then 2020 hits, and God had called me to run for the State House of Representatives. And, I was at a Heritage Foundation event speaking on election integrity, and I kind of just let off my comments. I said, honestly, I didn't expect to be an election integrity legislator. I wanted to do, guns and life and taxes and all the normal conservative stuff. Right. And 2020 happened, and I said, whoa, and I took a deep dive. And I saw how epically broken our system is. I mean, it's amazing to me that we look at government, and we know the DMV sucks because we sit in line for, 4 hours waiting to get a new driver's license, right? We know that the U.S. Postal Service sucks because it loses $8 billion a quarter, right? Amtrak, we can go down the litany, EPA, Department of Transportation, whatever it is. We know that government is at absolute best incompetent, right? At worst, it's, maladministration and malfeasance. Right. But somehow we fooled ourselves into thinking that elections are the one area of government that are miraculously just run well. And as I got in and I did a deep dive, I realized that's just simply not the case. So I became an election integrity legislator. And, I'll just tell you, to get back to the core of your question, you got to go where God calls. But that means you have to be prayerful about it. You have to diligently look at where he might be calling you. And if you feel pulled to be involved in this, it's probably more than just sitting on the sidelines tweeting or posting on Facebook or Truth Social, right? Right. The reality is that, like I said earlier, our founding fathers, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Franklins, they weren't more qualified than the people listening to this podcast or this radio show right now. They simply had the courage to step up when time and circumstance called their name, when it was their time to make an impact on history. We need more patriots today to just be willing to step into the game. You don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to know how to run a campaign right off the bat. There are resources that exist, groups like Tea Party Patriots and Turning Point Action, Turning Point PAC, Eagle Forum, Americans for Limited Government, Heritage Action. Yeah, you go down the list. Yeah. There are groups that are there to help. American Majority has some great resources for first-time candidates. Right. There are groups that are there to help. You've just got to have a servant's heart and be willing to step in and defend freedom for the next generation.
That's exactly right. And Leadership Institute also. They do amazing
LI
training.
does wonderful trainings.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you taking the time to answer that. And I hope that if people are listening and they are feeling that tugging, that they listen to it and prayerfully consider it and step up the way that you do.
Amen.
So Jake, has anyone ever told you that you have an optimistic spirit about conservatism? And it makes me think of what Ronald Reagan might have been like if I had ever gotten to meet him, just smiling with your love of the country.
No, I appreciate that, though. Look, here's how I'm going to respond to that. In Romans, Paul and Silas are literally in jail. They are in their version, the Romans version of a gulag, just like the J6 political prisoners are in today in Washington, D.C., but yet because they knew who the king was, it didn't matter who the king was. And they could praise God and they could worship while being in jail. And when we know the resolute power of our Lord and Savior, of Jesus Christ, he will use that worship and that resolve and that commitment to our principles, that commitment to our faith to literally bring down the walls of those prisons. We have got to have the courage to step in and fight this game. And if we aren't happy warriors about it, man, it will eat you alive. So we got to have some optimism. We got to know that we're on the right side of history, that our principles win, and that God wins in the end.
Jake Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin, produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, and directed by Luke Livingston. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.
If you like this episode, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment or a 5-star review. And if you want to be the first to know every time we drop a new episode, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications on whichever platform you're listening to. If you do these simple things, it will help the podcast grow, and I appreciate it very much.